Hello, everybody. My name is James. I thought today was as good of a time as any to start making YouTube videos. Hello. Um, since this is my first video, it'll probably be a bit rambly, and I kind of wanted to set the tone. I've been thinking about starting a YouTube channel for a while. I kind of want to set the tone for what the channel is going to be about and who I am, and kind of take it from there. Edit a little bit more heavily as time goes on, get a little bit better equipment as time goes on, so on and so forth. So first, my name is James. I work in tech. I'm a site reliability engineer, basically software engineer. Um, I work on infrastructure largely instead of like websites and React and stuff like this. But I do all that fun stuff on my side projects and my time off and kind of like other things that I'm doing. So I spend the good amount of my time on a chair behind a computer screen writing code and stuff like that. I just returned to the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen. Um, I left the U.S. I've been leaving the U.S. quite a lot for work. I've worked for some Chinese companies in the past, spent a lot of time in China and elsewhere. Worked for various startups. We had some people that were working with us in South America. I spent a lot of time in South America. Um, but it was around the time of the kind of George Floyd riots that were going on. I lived in Seattle at that time. That was where my home base was. Again, I was traveling a lot. And I was married at the time. I'm no longer married. And, we were in the city and they were rioting. They were attempting to burn buildings down. They're throwing bombs through the police headquarters in Seattle, which we lived right by. And so kind of when all of this was happening, we made the decision that it was just time to like leave America for a while because not many major cities were really faring much better. I mean, granted, I think that Seattle was hit a little bit worse than most cities were, but most cities, like me and my wife, my ex-wife, kind of perceived at the time, like cities were just kind of going to shit here. And so we went to live in Thailand for a while. And then from there, we went to Singapore and we separated when we were in Singapore. We lived in Thailand for about a year and a half, and Singapore for about 2 years, a year and 3 quarters or so. And then I spent a lot of time kind of just drifting around through Asia after we separated. Mainly, I was in Japan, in Tokyo, and in Seoul, South Korea. Um, and I just recently, last month, I moved back to the United States. It actually began as sort of a trip to see family. Most of my family's in Southern California. I have some family in Texas too, which is one of the reasons why I ended up moving here. Um, yeah, and so I'm in Austin now. I live downtown. It's a pretty cool place. It's very pretty. The weather is pretty nice. My family lives up around the Dallas area, so I've gone up there a few times. The weather up there is way shittier than it is down here in Austin. I mean, today I'm in shorts and a t-shirt. I was outside earlier taking a walk, picking up some coffee, and comfortably walking around. And so I think the weather in Austin is really amazing, especially compared to a lot of the rest of northern Texas, um, which I hear can get pretty bad. This is, again, my second month in Texas. Maybe in Austin it gets worse. Maybe I'm just at a particularly pleasant time right now, but as it's early January, I mean, this is pretty much in the dead of winter. So I can't imagine that I'll be in store for too many surprises, but who knows? Um, coming back here has definitely been a culture shock, especially because, you know, I spent the majority of my time in the United States prior to moving on the West Coast. I lived on the East Coast also for a while, but primarily on the West Coast, which is generally much more liberal and much more kind of the culture is just very different than it is in Texas, I think. And I know that I'm in Austin, and Austin is kind of like a liberal enclave inside of Texas, but it's still, the culture is quite different than what I'm used to on the West Coast. And I've been living in Asia for pretty much the past 5 years unbroken, and a couple years before that off and on, just because I was going over there so much. And so it's very odd to me because it's like I'm an American, but I'm having culture shock coming back to America, and especially in a place that's culture is a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more American than where I grew up at. And it's definitely led to a lot of, I bow to people sometimes still. I'm really trying to break that habit because it's super fucking embarrassing, and it really throws people off when, you know, someone holds the door for me or something like that and I bow to them when I go by. It's just because, you know, I've been in Japan for a really long time before I came over here, and bowing is like waving in Japan. It's the thing that you do instead of waving to people, you know, or shaking their hand or something like that. You bow to them. And so it's a real hard, once you get it ingrained in your subconscious that it's like that's what you do, it's hard to break it. Like shaking hands is hard to break when you go to Asia. People don't really shake hands, and it's kind of weird. um, but obviously, like a white guy in Texas bowing to somebody else is probably more aware than me trying to give a Asian person a handshake when I'm in Asia. But um, you know, and then I mean, Austin is also at night. It just turns into the night of the living dead outside. I noticed a lot of the kind of like, I live in, I guess you'd say, one of the fancier apartment complexes in downtown Austin, and there's a bunch of fancy apartment complexes everywhere. I mean, not like where I live is particularly bougie or anything like that compared to everything else that's here, but the apartment complexes will the one that I live in, at least, and I know I met somebody that lives in another apartment complex that has this similar kind of thing, is, you know, all the regular amenities, pools and blah blah blah, and like all of that's on site obviously inside of the apartment complex, but also they have convenience stores that you can get to from the apartment complex without having to go outside. And so I think that a lot of these kind of things, these apartment complexes and stuff like that that are located downtown are like a space station or something like that, in a sort of way to think about. Like, you don't need to go outside. Everything you need is inside of here. And so like after 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. or something like that, there's no need to go outside. Also, very interestingly, I've never seen this in any, Austin's not a huge city, but I noticed that everything in downtown closes like around 7 or 8. I think a few things maybe are open until 9, and then there's a bunch of bars and comedy clubs and stuff like that that are downtown too, and obviously those are open until pretty late. So if you walk to, you know, I'm right off of Congress. I'm right by Joe Rogan's comedy club. They got like a bunch of bars and stuff down there too, and those are going to be open until like super late at night. And they're generally playing. There's always live music playing from the early morning, you know, from like 8, 9 in the morning. People are already setting up and playing live music and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. I think that Austin is kind of famous for its concentration of like live music venues and live music events that are constantly going on everywhere, both small and big. Which is cool. I'm into live music. I am kind of like a novice at the guitar, and so, you know, I plan to in the future go to some live music and enjoy it and stuff like this. But I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I think that one of the things that's like really relevant, especially like from my perspective, just being abroad in so many different places, and then coming back over here, you know, like the homelessness and stuff like that. It's really sad to me. Um, it seems very unnecessary with as much kind of like wealth and as advanced as the United States is. the solution probably isn't to just throw money at the problem or anything like that. I think they're attempting to do that in places like California and Washington State, and it's not really panning out for them. It's just making the problem a lot worse. But I mean, like America is purportedly the most advanced, wealthy society that's ever existed. Like, I would imagine that this should be a solvable problem, and it's not solved. And so to me, it seems an awful lot like there's a lot of interest in keeping society in this sort of way, which is really sad. And I guess that's what makes it feel kind of like when I walk outside and I'm seeing all of the stuff that's going on. I'm seeing cops being deployed with their lights and stuff almost every night. Ambulances out there, gunshots. I heard some gunshots last night, in downtown in the nice area, like and I'm hearing stuff like that or whatever. And to me, it's just like it just starts to chip away. When my lease is up here at this apartment, like I'm gonna move to Westlake or outside of the downtown area because this shit chips away at your psyche. You see it every day, and then there's some people that just ignore. Like, I go to a restaurant to pick up some food, like to go or something like that. If I don't feel like cooking or whatever, I'm busy doing coding and stuff like that. And I'll be waiting in line, and then somebody in line will just like start chit chatting with me. America's very chit chatty, which is another point of culture shock for me because in Asia, they're not chit chatty. You don't talk to, and a lot of context. This is a generalism. There are exceptions to every rule or whatever, but I haven't gotten, and especially in Japan, but all of Asia really. I don't really get engaged in random conversations unless it's like somebody that's trying to get me to get my business or something like that, like for their shop to custom tailor in Singapore, or prostitute or something like this, starts talking to a girl in front of a girl's bar. Will try to get your attention, get you to go in and spend money on all the girls shaking their asses in front of your face or whatever. And so, it's like, but aside from that, aside from business stuff, there isn't much cause and many instances of people just, hey, how are you doing today? The weather is pretty good. What's your name? That's a cool shirt that you're wearing. There's not much of that goes on. And here there's a lot of, in America, there's a lot of that. And I'm used to that. In California, it was the same too. In Texas, it's kind of on the next level, I think. And so there are very kind of like people wearing a cowboy hat and very traditionally Western or whatever, and which is cool. But, I'll be waiting in line in one of these stores, and people will chit chat like with each other, or somebody that's also standing alone in the line or something like that will start trying to chit chat with me and everything like this. And to me, on top of the culture shock thing and just like not being used to that or whatever, it's also like I just stepped over like 7 homeless people to get here, man. Like, are we just pretending that we don't live in a fucking post-apocalyptic fucking nightmare society right now or something like that? Like, so it's really hard for me to, and I think that it's an acquired skill, and I think that people that have that kind of mentality have probably lived in downtown areas in the United States for a really long time. This has come on gradually, and then you're just like, well, I just need to like ignore this. That's the only way that I'll be able to get by day to day without being fucking depressed all the time. And I haven't developed that skill. And so, it's just really hard. It's like the house is on fire, and then your friend walks into the kitchen with you and starts making coffee and talking to you about what the day's plans are or something like that. And it's just like, man, like this is nuts. And so I need to get out of the city. After the lease here is over, to save my psyche, because I could feel it slowly chipping away at my psyche. And this is something that happened when I was living in Seattle and stuff too, before we decided to leave. By the time we decided to leave, I had real problems controlling when I would get angry about stuff, because I was angry so often, because I was just living, there's abject misery all around me. Every time I walked outside, people doing heroin and coke and shit on the side of the streets, and screaming at people and whatever, and you just ignore them. And it's just like, that's just a part of life. And It's like, no, it's not. Like, go anywhere else. Like, probably not to Europe, because Europe is also in the middle of its own shit show or whatever. But I mean, like, I've been in Asia, I've been in China. I spent a lot of time in China, and we're always talking about how fucking bad China is and how much it sucks. There's none of this shit in China. None. I've never seen one homeless person in probably a cumulative year of time that I've spent in China. Not one homeless person living on the street doing drugs on the sidewalk, you know. And I'm not saying that homeless people are the problem. I'm saying that society that's creating so many homeless people is sick in some sort of way, and it doesn't seem to be getting fixed. It seems to be getting worse, and this doesn't exist in other societies. And so I often hear the argument that it's like, well, I mean, it's just the consequence of big cities, or just the consequence of cities, or something like that. And it's like, go to Asia, go to Singapore, go to Japan. Japan has homeless people. That's the only place in Asia, in Eastern Asia, that I've been to where I've ever seen any homeless people is in Japan. And I hear that they do quite a good job of discreetly sweeping all these sorts of problems under the rug. And so it might be a little bit more severe in Japan than what I'm aware of, but I mean, certainly none of them scream at you. Certainly none of them are doing heroin on the side of the street and tweaking out and just like twitching and walking around, talking to themselves and stuff like that. When you walk by them and you're just like, is this guy going to try to hit me in the back of the head with something when I walk by him, because he's talking to his imaginary friend right now while he's tweaking out on the side of the street or something like that. And it's just like those little potentially dangerous situations are just littered all over the city whenever you're taking a walk outside, sometimes during the daytime, generally past 6 p.m. around Austin. And so, you know, like, yeah, I mean, just because I've seen other cities and I've seen other societies functioning without all of this shit. Um, I don't think that it's just a necessary part of a city, and it's like a part of humanity, and it's just always going to exist or something like that. I don't buy that. I reject that premise. And so when I do see it, like, there's an undertone of like legitimate evil to me that's like in the air. And so like something that I've started to kind of like tell myself, or at least think in the background or something when I go outside, is it's like the evil in the air is thick here, thick around these parts. But I know it would be the same in Los Angeles. I know that it is the same in Seattle because I was there relatively recently before I left the United States. I've lived in San Francisco. San Francisco is a fucking shithole. New York City, I've been to New York City a bunch of times. It's shithole. Like, the decay of society is really extreme. And when you've been to other places that haven't reached the peaks of decay that we've reached here in the United States so far, and then you return back to the United States, it's really like, it gives you perspective on it a little bit more too. And I think the perspective is a little bit more damaging to one's mentality. It's more damaging to my mentality, at least. And so, yeah, need to get out of the city. But I mean, besides that, you know, like, returning to America is pretty cool, and I hope in the future, theme of a lot of the videos and stuff that I'll make is kind of like differences um, between societies, things that I've experienced when I was living abroad. A lot of technology stuff I do. You know, I'm coding. I do Next development for UI stuff. I do back-end development. I do SRE stuff, you know, and use tools and cloud services and everything like that to try to build stuff out on my own. And that's the next, I guess, the last topic for this video that I kind of wanted to touch on is that, you know, on top of all of the kind of like homelessness issues and danger issues that I was already talking about, like, it's very weird to me right now. Life almost feels differently than it ever has before, and I started to kind of really notice that this after returning back to America, because not only do you have this societal decay that seems to be happening like on fast forward, like at increasing speed as time goes on, but also, there's the rise of AI right now, and there's a lot of people with wildly different opinions on like what the future is going to look like because of it in tech that make content and stuff like this. And my personal take on it is that the world's going to completely change. I mean, the content creators and stuff like this that are saying, AI is glorified text completion, and it's not going to threaten, it's not going to significantly change the workplace for technology workers. I think they're completely crazy, and I think that's a very egocentric and biased outlook to have, because I mean, I like to me it's similar to like a typewriter manufacturer or something like that back in the 80s, saying that little Apple was never going to amount to anything, and they weren't going to change the way that a paper was written, or that a message was sent from one person to another person or something like this. Like yes, it is, and maybe it stumbles a little bit, and maybe we're underwhelmed by the newest frontier models that are coming out or something like that. Or maybe there's people that are saying like, oh well, these companies that create these frontier models are overstating their capabilities to create like hype and opportunities for investment, new customers and stuff like this. And that's probably true to some extent, but like just because it didn't like ChatGPT, or I'm sorry, GPT-2 was like a few years ago, and we're already at a point where we could write like a lot of functional code with AIs where we couldn't at all a few years ago. And so when I hear people that are saying, "Oh, this isn't going to change the industry in any significant sort of way," I really think that's just an egocentric. Like they can't see past their nose when they're saying stuff like that. I'm so smart and I'm so good at what I do. There's no way that a glorified autocomplete box would be able to do a better job than me. And I just think that's missing the mark on many different levels. And so what I personally think that the future looks like, right? I can't make any specific predictions or anything like this, just like nobody else can accurately. And this is changing very, very rapidly. But what I think that the picture will kind of resemble is that it's the economy, the world's economy is going to favor entrepreneurial minded individuals, and it's going to be really, really harsh towards employees, and there's a YouTube content creator, Dan Koe, and he says a lot in his videos, and he kind of is echoing sentiments towards this particular subject that I completely agree with. Is you in life, you either create your own meaning or it is assigned to you, and that's kind of like the deeper, more fundamental observation to this whole thing. I think is like, yeah, there's practicality, like how am I going to pay my bills, how am I going to keep a roof over my head, how am I going to eat food, how am I going to bring in a paycheck every month. That is obviously kind of like the base layer of practicality that every adult needs to be concerned with. But I think that rests upon the idea of like, what is my meaning? And do I have meaning assigned to me at a job? Does my boss tell me what my priorities for the day, for the week, and for the month are going to be? Or do I do something myself? Do I try to put value? Do I try to inject value out into the world, and then I create my own priorities and I create my own meaning? And I think that sort of thinking is really uniquely human. And it's not like logic, it's not like procedural logic, understanding a protocol, for example. Like, I think that those are the kinds of things that AIs can and are becoming more capable in doing. But I think that being able to create your own value and assign meaning to yourself is like a really uniquely human thing. And I think that more people need to become oriented with that frame of thinking. And I think that it's going to be really hard to be an employee in the future. One, I think that you're going to be severely undervalued. Box movers, the procedural people that just follow what their bosses tell them to do or whatever, that's going to be devalued because we're going to have AIs sooner rather than later, I think, that are largely capable of doing that, maybe with some restrictions. And that's where you're going to need to bring humans into corporations as employees, is to kind of like fill in the gaps that are created by those restrictions. And that's going to be easy, that's going to be highly devalued, as opposed to kind of right now, if you're a software developer, you have priorities for features for an application or something that you need to create, and you still have a lot of autonomy in creating those. Even though that priority is being assigned to you, you still have a lot of autonomy in fulfilling that priority. I think that soon you're not going to have so much autonomy in fulfilling that priority, and then it's just going to become very procedural, and people start to resemble cogs in a machine a lot more than they currently do, at least like in the tech industry. That's where I work. That's where I've worked for over the past 10 years. That's where all of my thinking from work and stuff like comes into play. I know that there are more manual jobs and things that there's a lot of edge cases where AI and robotics and stuff like that might not fit in immediately. But in my industry, I think that there's plenty of room for integration. And so that's, with me making this first video, that's largely my motivation is, I have a set of work items. I have a set of things that I want to do outside of my job, and I want to start branching out and becoming more entrepreneurial minded myself. And part of that is, trying to create a community and a following around you as a person, and what your values are and what you bring to the table, and so I could show some tools. Maybe it's tools that people haven't heard of before. Maybe it's tools that people have heard of before, but they haven't seen it being used in the same way that I'm using it, and so on and so forth. And then when I do eventually have a product, if I have a following already, then the people that are in that following might be willing to try the product, one, because they know about it through following me, but two, because, if I'm so lucky to, in the future, have people that, enjoy my content or whatever, and perhaps enjoy my insights. Oh, this sounds so narcissistic. Then you might be, and this is the same for me too. Like I watched Dan Koe. I started using. He created a product called Cortex, which is more or less Notion. Probably get really pissed off if I said that, but I mean, like, it seems a lot like Notion to me. And so, but I'm using that because I think that he has really valuable insights, and I think that with his type of personality that he has and the type of person that he is, or at least that he presents himself on his videos to be, then he is the type of person that would oversee the creation of a quality product and a useful product. And I think that usefulness and productivity and quality are important qualities to him based off of the videos that I see. So I think that those values will probably be reflected in the product, which would make it a good product. Hopefully this could turn into the same type of thing for me. And I would encourage anybody watching this to start thinking in those terms, because I think that it's really important to begin thinking in those terms, because I think that this is the way that the world is trending. And if in the future, you're an employee, you go to a Google or a Meta or a smaller shop to work, to have priorities assigned to you, that's really scary, man. And I think that we should all be moving away from that kind of like model, and towards independence and entrepreneurship. I think that there's plenty of time to do it still. I don't think that the world is going to be completely changed in the next year or two, but 3 years, 4 years down the road, I think that shit's gonna start to get pretty crazy. And so we could start to take the first steps together as a people now to kind of like prepare ourselves for the radically different future that's rapidly approaching. We could hope that it's going to turn out the best, but we could prepare for it not turning out so great. And if this puts more power in the hands of corporations and stuff like that, like just think back in history how many times of corporations had the best interests of the people at large in the society at which the corporation operates. Like how often has their well-being been at the top of the corporate priorities? And I just, we're seeing in the government right now corporate interests aligning with and merging with government interests quite a bit. And so I think that if we don't take the necessary steps to prepare ourselves for the future, a lot of us are going to find ourselves out, on the streets of Austin or whatever city we're in right now, because we could see how much the government and the wealthy class cares about them, which is not at all. Otherwise, the situation wouldn't be happening in the first place. Harkening back to the first thing that I was talking about, we're the wealthiest, most powerful nation on Earth, and a problem that should be really easy for the wealthiest and most powerful nation on Earth to solve domestically goes year after year after year, only getting worse, not getting better. And so when it's you that falls between the cracks as the cracks are widening, I don't think that there's going to be, I don't think that Big Brother is going to be, laying a safety net for us to fall into. I think that we are going to be up the creek without a paddle, so to speak, at that time. And so you're your best security policy. You're your best bet for the future. And thinking independently, thinking entrepreneurially, I think is maybe the only viable path forward soon here. So anyways, I'm James. I will be making more videos periodically, hopefully increasing in quality, and as time moves forward, as I learn more about editing and equipment and stuff like this. But yeah, have a good day.